Dear listeners, welcome to the quarterly podcast of the EU Horizon 2020 project TRUSTS, Trusted Secure Data Sharing Space. The central question for today is, how will data markets shape the European industry? Today I'm here with Bert Utermark. He is a partner at TDA Trusted Data Analytics in Vienna and at Governance One, where he advises clients on how to accelerate their digital transformation journey. He holds an MBA from IMD Switzerland and a lead certificate in corporate innovation from Stanford Graduate School of Business. But what is more important for today is that Bert develops sustainable business models for the TRUSTS platform within the wider data ecosystem. Welcome, Bert. My second guest is Hosea Ofe. He is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Technical University Delft and works on the TRUSTS project. Hosea seeks to explore the design of plausible business models and value propositions associated with data marketplaces. Hosea is broadly interested in new digital platforms and ecosystems, exploring tensions and strategies that organizations adopt as they transition to platforms. Hosea holds a PhD in informatics, a MSc in finance, as well as a MSc in information technology management from Umeå University in Sweden. Welcome, Hosea. With the TRUSTS project, the European Commission initiates a pan-European solution for data-related issues of the future. The aim is to innovate European data markets through trust, security, and federation. Partners of the project are located in 9 European countries. Data sharing will shape the future of Europe as far as economy and society are concerned. It bears huge potentials, but also comes with risks and concerns. The EU project TRUSTS was established to identify and overcome legal, ethical, and technical challenges of cross-border data markets. So, dear Bert, dear Hosea, let's jump directly into the topic. To summarize, the TRUSTS project is a European innovation action to further drive the data economy within Europe. The project's integration will be tested in practice by 6 companies addressing 3 use cases in the financial and telecommunications sector. Furthermore, the trust technology and use cases will be constantly accompanied by business considerations, which will make sure that the results of the project are sustainable beyond the duration of the funding. So my first question for today is, which are those business considerations and how can they ensure sustainability? Bert, Hosea, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Nina, for this kind introduction. And indeed, it directly throws us into the water. And to the core of our TRUSTS project. So maybe first to get started, a quick look at what are these use cases that are actually deployed throughout the project in order to strengthen specific aspects of the TRUSTS platform and the overall development. So first use case is one of anti-money laundering, where ultimately different constituents in the financial services sector have the need to, on the one hand, share data and then to analyze data with intelligent models to detect fraud or money laundering. The second one is pretty much like one for agile marketing. So for cross-sell and upsell involving a bank on the one hand and a telco operator on the other hand, where obviously at times sensitive and personal data has to be shared. And on the other hand, then also needs to be analyzed in ways that helps to identify such upsell and cross-sell potential. And the last one is improved customer support service, where in interaction with the users and using also big data in finance, bots and other technologies for customer action can be fed and can be smartened up. I mean, bots, as we all know, in the financial service sector have been around for quite a long time, never really took up or took off to fulfill the potential ascribed to them. But I think the developments, particularly over the last 10 years in the data analytics space, provide totally new inroads. And this is something that obviously then touches on domains that are relevant for trust. So what are the business considerations? Coming back to your original question, Nina. I think if we look at what trust wants to be, then obviously we need to touch on the different levels of trust. One is trust as a data market itself. Then trust also aspires to create a federation of data markets or data rich providers, So also linking potentially to the aspired European data clouds, helping to bring the European data strategy to life. And then there's a whole field of the ecosystem with the auxiliary services that need to be provided. So if we look at the use cases, all of them help us to deep dive, model, and test specific aspects of what TRUSTS overall aspires to be. And then we see, and this is also learning for us, that obviously, if you provide something which you label in a certain way, let's say TRUSTS is a data market, we will find ourselves in a position, and we see this clearly now with our use case partners, where TRUSTS maybe is not a data market. TRUSTS is an amalgamation of standards and technologies, and of course, with ethical governance principles around it, that can be used solution by solution as to the requirements of the end user. And our work here is to see how can we have proof of concept for certain aspects, and how can we generalize them. So we say we want to have a safe, secure data exchange. So if we talk about where business ideation and business considerations come into the mix, then obviously here we have to think about aspects of standardization, like the IDS framework. So one of the aspirations of TRUSTS is really to explore where on a technological, legal, and business domain we can provide guidance and standardization to help widespread adoption. Next, we talk about data privacy and GDPR compliance. And again, there is an element of research in here where sometimes if we talk about distributed computing or sharing of data anonymization becomes very pertinent. But then how do I make my machine learning systems come up to speed if I only have anonymized data? Because obviously something will be lost in the granularity that can be provided. We also consider, when we talk about a decentral architecture, how can we separate metadata flows from data flows themselves? So enabling third parties to fulfill their data exchange and data analytics needs without necessarily interfering with a centralized system. And last but not least, we also, of course, have to keep in mind a data ecosystem, both the data ecosystem of the TRUSTS platform itself, but also the wider European data ecosystem. So here we look at what services seem to be so-called low-hanging fruits, services that can be easily developed, easily adapted, and added to the overall TRUSTS environment. And while we move forward, I have to say we are now 1 year in the project, we learn as we go. So in discussions with our use case partners, we try to address these points in order not just to have individual use cases that help the individual partners to strengthen their business, but to arrive at generalizable conclusions and technical solutions that then can be brought and provided to the wider public or to the wider European data ecosystem, maybe through use of the TRUSTS platform itself, or through adoption of technologies or standards that we develop.
Thank you very much, Bert. So just for clarification, the use cases you mentioned are examples for such business models based on platforms like TRUSTS.
Yes.
Okay, I see. So it seems that there evolve new data-driven business models. Are there also potentials to optimize existing business models? Maybe you could give us an outline here of such potential optimizations.
Yeah, I think most of the things that Bert said, I think they are very relevant. And I think the complexity that comes very much with when it comes to data platforms, when it comes to data marketplaces, it's something that really challenges existing businesses. And I do think that one of the things that, if you think about the ideas of data analytics, how can new insights be gained from using this data to improve existing services within an organization? And within the TRUSTS project itself, those are some of the very big questions that it becomes so tricky to say what is the specific role that we can think of when we think of TRUSTS. And if we look around us very much, we think that there are a lot of different business ideas, business models that we can think of trust to play. For example, trust could play the role of integrating data from different domains. In that way, it is a little bit decentralized in such a way that different actors can provide data to trust, and trust can facilitate in the trading of this data. Trust could provide like a type of platform and architecture that helps small and medium-sized companies that don't have the resources to be able to engage in data provision. And in that way, I think that will solve a very big problem when it comes to making trust very viable and sustainable over time. And some other options as well could be the idea of not just providing data, could be providing other services that could deal around data. For example, checking like what Bert said could be about maybe trying to create some sort of uniform standards around the data ecosystem. It could also be about you providing some sort of improving data quality. In that way, the data becomes not just the core essence of trust, but the services that trust builds around could be very important, very much. And those are just some thoughts that I do think personally, but I feel that over time, of course, trust is going to evolve and new ideas going to come in, and maybe new business models that can make trust much more valuable.
Yeah, I think exactly building on what you say, Hosea. If you look at trust, I mean, there's obviously the question, what value propositions can trust provide and build its own business model around it. But with the digital economy, the way how we collaborate across individual entities, across value chains, changes dramatically. So the traditional view just of a linear value chain is long since disrupted. So we go into value webs, more in competition and then cooperation in untapping new sources of value. So I like to think of it like as an onion model. So at the core, we got the trust platform that, of course, needs to have a business model to be sustainable. But already when we talk about the ecosystem of trusts with the auxiliary services that are provided, then there is already space for new business models. And beyond that, obviously, the end users will have new opportunities. So we talked about value chains. If you think, for example, about supply chain integration, if you want to play open book, but need to have exact pinpointed ability to determine what information is shared with an entity that, of course, is further on in the value chain, if you're, let's say, an OEM supplier, in order to enable highly efficient, just-in-time processes, then some of the technologies which we provide in the trust stack, which follow, of course, standardization frameworks, are such that these entities can embark on totally new products and services, and hence also different business models. It's kind of a decomposition of the standardized monolithic view of organizations as entities as a whole, as more as clusters of capabilities that form businesses with underlying business models in its own right. More close to the center of trust, obviously, there will be a stronger emergence of data brokers, may it be entities or individuals who actually help particular small and medium businesses to foster this collaboration. So one of the key aspects which we haven't cracked, and I think nobody really has cracked, is the pricing of data, fair pricing. So what you more often than not end up with is different entities share different capabilities, different assets together in a trusted platform to secure data exchange to then jointly reap the benefits of that. So this data brokerage and pretty much an external data scientist service of sorts to small and medium businesses that may not be as far advanced in their own organizational build-up is certainly something that we will see more and more. And last but not least, there will be, of course, joint plays with trusts and with others together. If you look, of course, at the big tech players and the big data clouds that are available, here everything comes together. So we of course have functionality of data exchange or data markets, but at the same time, these are ecosystems that encourage new players or existing system integrators and IT service providers to jump in and provide their services and develop their services with the constituents. So overall, it is the creation and the promotion of a very rich data ecosystem. And in such, I also want to issue like a word of warning. I mean, trust itself, I mean, certainly will not be the next Google, so to speak. This can't be the aspiration here. But I'm very hopeful that trust as a platform itself, with eased onboarding and dedicated support for its users and ecosystem constituents, will be attractive. But even if trust itself is not what is visible necessarily to the multitude of entities, then what we develop here, of course, through multiplicator effect, will be availed through the wider data ecosystem in Europe. So even somebody who will never have heard or never have interacted with trust will reap the benefits to potentially enter new business models or to increase their products and services.
Yeah, I was thinking to add a few things to what Bert said. I think that comes down really to the very intricacies that are involved when we talk about business models when it comes to something like data. You know, the difficulties of pricing it, for example. Sometimes it's so different in the sense that, let's say, if you were to go to the market, you want to buy a physical product, of course, you know what you want to do with a physical product sometimes. It's very clear from the beginning. But with data, it's so tricky in such a way that the value of that data, sometimes you don't know it upfront. So that's why when it comes to business models for data marketplaces, we need to take a lot of things that are happening around the ecosystem into consideration, because it's affected. There's that web of interdependencies, which makes a lot of things to be so fragile in the ecosystem.
Thank you very much for that interesting input. So I can see that there are a lot of potentials arising, whether it might be new business models or existing business models. Maybe to make it a little bit more tangible, the both of you mentioned services resulting from the platform. Maybe you can provide a few examples that the listeners can also know which are the services I personally can benefit from this platform.
Well, I mean, so let's look at the different value propositions of the platform. I said at the very core, it talks about safe, secure data exchange in a decentralized architecture. If you think of it, if you are a small, medium business and you have a case where you need to collaborate, let's talk about, let's say, tourism in one of the regions of Austria. So there are very various constituents who in themselves and by their nature don't have very elaborate digitalization capabilities. But they may face the need to create a shared space to provide data and capabilities, and maybe also from their local or regional setup want to involve service providers to help them to together explore and develop what can help them. So one can think, for example, through the decentralized nodes of trusts to set up data spaces that utilize, if and as required, certain mechanisms of decentralized services in case you need to go to billing of data, in case you need to track transactions, or if you want to utilize some of the global data service providers linked to the platform through the open architecture. And in the secure space, you can then, in a collaborative manner with the other players, may it be, let's say, the tourism board of the region, a bunch of hotels in there, a number of service providers, restaurants, and whatever is needed, weather data that might be provided, can put these together, collate the data, and then either just utilize it directly or in dialogue with respective experts, should you not have them, look if this data can be analyzed and transformed further. And maybe then there's even an opportunity for the startup in there that can provide an app with appealing graphical representation of what will be needed for the end user, in this case, the tourist. So this is a very small aspect. We can also go, of course, to big cooperations like we have here with our use cases, where across financial entities and regulators, data will be shared. So they may want to use advanced security technology that is being provided, visualization and trained ML models that really help them to put whatever they want to achieve to the next level. In this case, it was obviously anti-money laundering, which is relying on just such a magnitude of data, pretty much seeking the needle in the haystack. And I think we are just embarking on the journey. We are on year 1 out of a 3-year project. But ultimately in dialogue with our use case partners, but also with partners in the wider European data ecosystem, we are starting, and Hosea, maybe you've got more tangible things already in mind. I know it's always fun to work with you on these. I think we are just like right now seeing certain value propositions forming that then I think need to be marketed and provided in a very solution-centric way. So if you look back at the last 10 years, there've always been like aspirations to bring data markets to life. Yeah. So the motto being, okay, I up demand, I up supply, and magic will happen. But we, I think, have a responsibility to take a data user perspective, which is typically a business case or solution-based perspective. So they want to solve certain problems. Just saying, oh yeah, let's provide all the data is not enough. So yes, we will obviously utilize initiatives on a European basis. We think about the data clouds and then all the good things happening there, or the European Open Science Cloud is already up and running. Of course, this will be provided, and also government more and more also through upcoming regulations. Think about the European Data Governance Act, that these magnitude of data will not be sufficient to really help European businesses and organizations and also individuals to really reap the benefits. So I think there is a translatory effort, and through technology and evangelism, I think platforms like TRUSTS, and there are a number of other initiatives with us running in parallel, will help to bring that to life ultimately.
Thank you, Bert. So I think you have outlined that there's a wide range of benefits that enterprises could benefit from. But how would you assess the current willingness of decision makers in European companies to implement such data-driven innovations? You have mentioned the evangelism that is necessary. Maybe, Hosea, could you give us an outline of your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think some of the things that Bert said very much were tied very much into understanding why. What do we need to make organizations to be very much excited about participating in such type of marketplaces? And one of the things that I do reflect on very much, it comes down to the idea of the value proposition. What would they gain from this? I think if we can tackle that aspect, it becomes much easier for them. Because if we think that most organizations, they're not like they don't just operate to change the world. They're operating because they want to get something in return, like a profit or something. So one thing that I see that it's very important for us to change this mindset of maybe this reluctance that is often associated with the marketplaces is to show use cases, show examples that have been successful. And we should also understand that one thing that's important also, the idea of participating in data marketplaces or sharing data, it's not just a technical problem. Most of the times, most of these efforts, they entails a lot of changes within the organization, where organizations have to change their processes, how they work, and practices, and these things sometimes take their very, organizations operate in such context that they have different forces, some institutional forces, that they want to maintain things to be the way they've always been. So it requires some sort of really, it's a platform evangelism to change the mindset of this. I'm thinking of a story where I was following the launching of a platform very much. What they did was that they hired some guy who was so popular out there to go do some evangelism for them, and the guy had to be tweeting, talking about, oh, this is so viable, everyone should come look at this. And that really worked. Actually, it worked at the end, because most of the times people need to really see what are the benefits in there for them. And we can't just invest in new infrastructure, new systems in the organization without seeing how this will create benefits. So I think where I see that a lot needs to be done very much is the idea of sensitization, keeping people aware that this is important for us. It's not just about saying that there is data out there. Of course, there will always be data out there. The problem is always like, what do we do with this data? And that's what I see that we need to do quite much to make this a reality.
Yeah, I think, like, seconding what you say, Hosea, it's not a problem of the willingness. So I'm a big believer in free market economy and autopoiesis. And I think, Nina, you're Austrian, so Schumpeter will tell you something, no? Destruction for the sake of rebirth and innovation. The system itself, through a free market force, will be strong enough. But I think it is the responsibility of the governing bodies, maybe at the national or at the European level, to provide an environment and an infrastructure that eases the process and expedites the process to utilizing all that is out there. So it's not necessarily the lack of willingness, it needs the evangelism or the education that Hosea elaborated on. But then there are these things that must be in place, like trust, freedom of choice. We cannot just rely on a very few select infrastructure players that on top of their infrastructure stack many services, because ultimately this will deteriorate to oligopolistic scenarios where the choice and the freedom of both organization entities like companies or research institutions, but also of the individual, are at stake. And so by providing a solution that, for example, is GDPR compliant, that makes active policy recommendations and through exactly use cases and demonstrators shows that it can deliver. I think this will expedite and facilitate an embracing of digital transformation that will need to happen anyway. Trust or not trust, digital transformation is a reality. And whilst we, of course, have like setups where small and medium businesses might have their small and local constituents, ultimately, to stand the test of time at all aggregate levels of the economy, we need to support. And once I think constituents see that the support is there, they will, in an enhanced speed, embrace what they would embrace anyway.
Thank you very much for that outline. So I think we can say that that there's a lack of awareness creation. So we need best practices that convince enterprises to follow that approach, but also active governments that show that this is possible and brings an added value. We are already almost at the end of our podcast, so I would like to ask you one last question. Where do you personally see the greatest potentials of the TRUSTS project, and what are the biggest risks that the TRUSTS consortium might encounter from your point of view?
That's a tricky one. Hosea, do you want to give it a shot, or do you want me to do it first?
Yeah, I think personally, I think that the TRUSTS project, they're doing quite well, and all the components of the project, of course, they are quite important. And for me personally, I see that TRUSTS has the potential to really become a very sustainable platform, very much if it can come up with very clear business models. Because I feel that one of the things that really tie back a lot of data marketplaces, it's the idea of what is it in there that will benefit different stakeholders. You know, I think the government can play the role of subsidizing users in the beginning, of course, but the long-term sustainability of data marketplaces will very much come down to their value proposition. What is in there that organizations can get? So I think that that's an important aspect, and I feel that a lot Trust will probably get to do something in this regard. And as it comes to risk, you asked about the risk of the risk that the project faces very much. Of course, like any other project, at the end of the day, you often want to have a very concrete outcome. This is the outcome from this, and most of times, if you look at most platform development projects, they tend to skyrocket, maybe in terms of their scope. The outcome becomes so difficult to really define. But I feel that that can be very much handled if you look at it in terms that I think the different tasks in the projects, they seems to be going much in time, and I think it's more about the final outcome. What is the concrete outcome at the end, and the time to achieve that.
I think looking at this, so maybe more a risk that I see, but then maybe we can discuss how we can convert it into an opportunity. Is indeed the project setup. Because ultimately it's a mandate given by the European Commission as part of the Horizon 2020 program. And as such, it's a research and development project, an innovation action, which automatically then lends itself to the question, will it lead a standalone sustainable solution? So will Trust at the end of the project, so to speak, tick all the boxes, maybe exceed expectations, and will be operated as one of the many players in the market. If you ask me about the key risks I see, then I have to be very honest. It is a 3-year project where we at times explore groundbreaking things, particularly in the technology domain. And nobody would have foreseen at the point of writing the tender or then responding to it, what the world would look like or what we know right now. So by definition, there is a certain danger given the chasm between the mandating policy setting entities and the partners in our consortium that obviously do not allow for the degree of agility over a 3-year project span to adjust to what we learn as we go. So I'm missing at times an active involvement, an active dialogue with a single source sponsor of a project where I can say, look, very sorry, I mean, this was what we set out to do, but 1 year in the project, to little surprise, we actually learned something. Why don't we sit again and adjust what we want to do? Now, I understand this is not how the game is being played, but there is a certain danger in that, obviously. Trying to frame it positively, whilst we may not achieve what was set out myriads ago and will come to fruition in myriads to come. The key benefit of trust is really in the interaction with the players in the markets, in the outputs we create, because all of this, or at least most of it, will be public domain, so that other initiatives and projects, may they be publicly funded or in private-public partnership, or also at a private level, can leverage whatever we find in our research and development activities. And so aspects and components that are elaborated and further enhanced throughout the project will find its way. So basic example, you may have heard of the IDS framework, where certain standards and technology components are being defined, which in turn will help to underpin the aspiration of Gaia X, which in turn is one of the key cornerstones, as it turns out, of bringing the European data strategy to life. So I don't think it is shameful to be humble and say the aspiration is not to be the ruler of the world, but to make a meaningful contribution through this dissemination and the networking, the snowballing that we do with the various components and capabilities we bring about in the project.
Thank you very much, Bert. And this brings us to the end of our podcast. So thank you, Hosea, and thank you, Bert, for discussing. I really enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to get a deeper insight into your business considerations, into your parts within the TRUSTS project. And dear listeners, I hope you enjoyed our podcast and make sure you follow up with our progresses. Thank you.